Good evening, everyone. My name is Jack Pott. I am the Assistant Music Director and Media Coordinator for Hartford Chorale. And I want to welcome you all to this program of the Hartford Chorale presented by the Education and Outreach Committee. Tonight is an historic night for this organization because even though we have participated in Martin Luther King Day events in the past with the HSO, tonight marks the first time that this organization is presenting a program specifically celebrating Black History Month. And what a program it is. We have four amazing artists who will be sharing their stories and their journeys in this wonderful world of vocal and choral music. First, I would like to ask our board president, Lalitha Shivaswamy, to say a few words. Lalitha?
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, everyone. Welcome. Good evening to all who joined us. My name is Lalitha Shivaswamy, and I'm honored to serve Hartford Chorale as President of Board of Governors. My sincere thanks goes to our Education and Outreach Committee for coming up with this idea and putting this together, to Lauren Lambert, who's our chair, to Jermaine Woodard, who's going to be our facilitator, to Stuart Battle, our board member, and to Blake Wetmore for their time and effort to do this. Thank you to all who continue to support the Hartford Chorale. It is an unprecedented year, but thanks to your support, we can protect and nurture the choral dream, which is our most beloved art form. If you need to know more about what we do and the rest of our season, please go to our website, and we have all the information for you, and you're going to love everything that you see. So I'm very, very excited for this evening. This is something that we wanted to do, and we have an excellent panel, and I can't wait to hear what they have to say. So I won't waste a single moment, and I will pass this on to our beloved Maestro Richard Coffey.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. And good evening, everyone. And welcome to another event in the Hartford Chorale's 2020-2021 season of well-reasoned alternatives, when we gather to remain united in our love and commitment of great choral music, and to the community which that art has built for centuries and continues to do so. Tonight, in honor of Black History Month, we are honored to present a panel of four distinguished African-American artists who are professionally active in the field of vocal and choral music. Each will speak about his or her career journey, their challenges, and their inspirations, followed by a time of Q&A. This entire evening facilitated, as you perhaps well know, by Jack Anthony Pott and assisted by Jermaine Woodard of our E&O committee. Our four guests will be formally introduced shortly, but meantime, I must express my personal appreciation for the presence of David Hurd, Cailin, Marcel, Manson, Jolie Rocke, and Howard Watkins, all stars in their fields, be they performer, educator, conductor, or composer. The chorale has a special link to Jolie Rocke in that she was the soprano soloist for our December 2005 performance of Handel's Messiah, and that was the first opportunity I had of conducting the Hartford Chorale, having just been named music director. So there's a bit of reunion here tonight with Jolie. We have before us a rich and fruitful opportunity for the Hartford Chorale and its members, friends, visitors, and guest panelists to engage in a timely social, cultural, and educational experience. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you so much, Mr. Coffey, for those words. As has been mentioned already, my cohort for tonight is Jermaine Woodard Jr., known by many of you in the Hartford Chorale and outside the chorale as one of our fabulous bass baritone vocal section leaders in the group and soloists. He's also on the Chorale Board of Governors and serves on the Education and Outreach Committee. Last fall, Jermaine, myself, Stuart Battle, and Blake Wetmore got together to talk about and dream about what this event should be. And what would be an appropriate event, and this is the fruit of those meetings. So at this point, I would like to turn it over to Jermaine.
Good evening, everyone. Does this sound okay? All righty. So let's get started. It is my pleasure to introduce our first artist. Dr. Howard Watkins is a frequent associate of some of the world's leading musicians on the concert stage and as an assistant conductor at the Metropolitan Opera. His appearances throughout the world have included collaborations with Joyce DiDonato, Kathleen Battle, Anna Netrebko, and Matthew Polenzani at such venues as the Kennedy Center, the United States Supreme Court, Alice Tully Hall, the three stages of Carnegie Hall, and the Bolshoi Theater in Moscow. He has accompanied the classes of legendary artists Renato Scotto, Frederica von Stade, Regine Crespin, Birgit Nilsson, Cheryl Mills, and George Shirley. His current and former faculty affiliations include the Juilliard School, the Bard College Conservatory of Music, the Tanglewood Music Center, and the Aspen Music Festival, to name a few. And he was recently named a Presidential Visiting Fellow for the Yale University Opera Program for the spring of 2021. A native of Dayton, Ohio, Mr. Watkins completed the Doctor of Musical Arts degree in accompanying and chamber music at the University of Michigan. The video you are going to see is from a live studio performance with soprano Kathleen Kim and features an excerpt from John Adams' Nixon in China. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Howard Watkins.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh my goodness. So fun to hear that again. I just love that piece. Thank you all so much for having me here. It's just amazing, and I'm really honored to be here looking at 4 screens of faces. It's a little daunting, but that's okay. As Jack told you, I'm originally from Dayton, Ohio, a Midwestern guy. And I grew up there in Centerville, Ohio, son of parents who are a French teacher and an engineer, and who were not musicians. But somehow I got really interested in music as a kid. Just played guitar and eventually started learning piano. And like many coaches and conductors, I grew up as a pianist. When I was in high school, I actually studied band instruments and got more into band, and eventually went to undergrad with the intention of studying engineering and doing another field, because I wasn't sure if I could make a living in music. I'm sure many of us have been in this situation. But after 2 years, I realized that absolutely was not going to work for me. I just needed to be a musician, and that's what I was going to do. So I finished up my undergraduate degree at the University of Dayton in Ohio. It's a very good engineering school. And I had good luck to have a great piano teacher there. And then I went to the school where he had gone to grad school, University of Michigan, where I had some of the most wonderful experiences in many ways. I studied solo piano first, but eventually went on to study piano accompanying and chamber music with the great accompanist Martin Katz, who many of you know, certainly. And while I was there, I had the opportunity to play a lot of collaborative music, and I got more and more interested. And at a certain point, I realized, wait a minute, I can actually just do this for real. This is really what I like doing. I like being around people. I like collaborating when I'm music making. Let's do it. Another thing I did at Michigan that was great fun, and this is how I met Jack Pott. I was the pianist for the men's glee club at Michigan for many years. I did it through my master's and through a period of time between degrees and throughout most of my doctorate. And I had a lot of experience playing for chorus at that time, enjoyed it tremendously. Got to work with the great Jerry Blackstone, who many of you may know. And it was a tremendous experience learning, tremendous experience as a musician, but also just great fun, great social fun. I also had, let me back up and say that throughout much of my life, I had very little problems or racial types of incidents. I was raised in I went to a private elementary school and a Catholic high school. So there weren't as many African American students at these schools. And we lived in a certain part of town where I just wasn't around that many black kids necessarily. But once I was at Michigan, that's where I first, it sounds negative the way I'm saying this, but that's where I first started to have some experiences that made me open my eyes a little bit. And one thing that I just was thinking about was throughout Glee Club, playing through Glee Club, I had a great time and I met some of my absolute best friends, but I also had a bunch of experiences that were a bit shocking. One of them, I remember we went on a tour to the South, and my parents are from the South. I had spent time in the South before, but I had never been in the South with a group of primarily Caucasian kids. And I remember one particular experience where we went to meet the host families who were going to take care of us and who were going to be so generous as to host us. So we're usually all very excited at this moment. We all got together. The lady came up to me, and when she saw me and realized that she was going to be hosting one of the few black kids, she suddenly became apprehensive, and she said, "Oh, I don't think this is going to work out because my dog doesn't like blacks," she told me. Can you imagine being told such a thing? So now you compare this to the stories of people who are older than I am and who have gone through a lot worse. Yes, that is not the worst thing in the world that can happen to you, but it was certainly humiliating and a bit shocking to me. And I had a few experiences like that in Glee Club, usually not from the guys in club. They were incredible, warm, supportive, great guys. But I had another experience going to Russia where the same thing happened. And in that case, I did not end up staying with the original lady. The host had to switch because the one lady was not comfortable having a black person in her house. So it's just, these moments are personally humiliating, but they're also, as a young person who was trying to get along with everybody, I felt myself trying to pretend that that didn't hurt and that it wasn't embarrassing. And I would somehow try to comfort the people who were around me who were uncomfortable. These are the kinds of weird things that we deal with. So let me go back to what I was saying. So at a certain point, I finished at University of Michigan. I finished my doctoral degree. I moved to New York City and began working in the Young Artists program at the Met Opera. That's for pianists. That was a 2-year program. And after that, I started working on music staff for them. And I have been there ever since and have loved my time there. This is, if you call this a season, this is my 23rd season at the Met. And I've had just really great experiences there. Very little outward incidents of racism, but many silly little subtle things that you may not even think of. Things like administrators feeling that because I hope you can tell that I'm generally a pretty good-natured guy. So the problem of that means that people feel comfortable saying inappropriate things to you and not understanding what it is that they're saying or doing. So I've had pretty high up people at the Met feeling comfortable telling me black jokes, for example, or talking to me about racial things that nobody should be talking about, and they certainly shouldn't be saying them to me. I've seen singers passed over or not considered for things, or been told by high up administrators about how certain singers are not suitable because of their race. And I've stood there, mouth open, thinking, not only is it horrible that you think this, but this is absurd and grotesque that you're telling me this. I would never say names, and I think times are changing. This is kind of a few years ago. I don't imagine that happens so much anymore, but one wonders. What else to tell you? I've had many other experiences playing for concerts with singers that I've met at the Met. And another odd thing that comes up sometimes is people have certain expectations about what they think you should like because they see the color of your skin. It happened that, as you all may know, Porgy and Bess was done at the Met a few years ago. It happened that it didn't work in my schedule for me to work on that show. So I can't tell you how many times during that period or since I've been approached by people that said, oh, you should have worked on Porgy and Bess. Why didn't you work on Porgy and Bess? I bet you would have done blah, 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 and this and that. And all I could think was, first of all, I didn't actually know Porgy and Bess before that, which is no problem. There's nothing wrong with that. And secondly, why would you assume that just because I'm Black, that therefore Porgy and Bess is where my heart lies? It may not be. It happens to. I like Britten a lot. Is that not okay for me to like Benjamin Britten, or for me to like Verdi or Puccini? So these kinds of experiences for younger people who may not have had enough experience or not settled enough to work their way through that are damaging and are really a shame. And so I'm really sorry to have seen that happen, and hope that as we're more aware, like what's going on these days, this past summer and through panels like this, that people become more aware and are more careful about things. Racism is not just actually killing people and police actions and so forth, but it's also more subtle things like this that tear down people's self-esteem and make assumptions about what they are and what they should be. I think that's all I want to say right now. Let's see what else comes up as we ask questions. Thank you.
Lovely. That was fabulous, Dr. Watkins.
Here we go.
All right. So next up, our second artist is baritone and conductor Cailin Marcel Manson, a Philadelphia native who has enjoyed an international career as an operatic, concert soloist, conductor, and master teacher. He has also been a guest cantor and soloist at some of the world's most famous churches and cathedrals, including Notre Dame in Paris, San Marco in Venice, Thomas Kirche and Nikolai Kirche in Leipzig, to name a few. In addition to numerous music director positions, both nationally and internationally, he has also served as a member of the faculty of the Vermont Governor's Institute on the Arts and the Performing Arts Institute of Wyoming Seminary. Mr. Manson is currently artistic director and conductor of the Germantown Concert Chorus in Philadelphia, music director of the Bennington County Chorale Society in Vermont, music director of Barn Opera in Vermont, music director of the Cailin Chorale in New Hampshire, and director of choral activities at Clark University. He studied voice performance at Temple University and opera performance and orchestral conducting at the Universität Mozarteum Salzburg. The video you are going to see features excerpts from his varied performances. Ladies and gentlemen, Kaelin Marcel Manson.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Jermaine, for that introduction. And I have to say that I'm so thrilled to be in such great company, not just with the community of singers, the musical community of the Hartford Chorale, but with such great company of such great musicians like Howard, Jolie, and Dr. Hurd. I can't even think to call David Hurd by his first name because I grew up singing so much of David Hurd's music as a child and as a teen. And I guess, trying to do the Reader's Digest version of one's journey is hard in 10 minutes, but I'll try to do that because I think all of us panelists have so many things and so many sort of sidetracks that got us to where we are currently. It's hard to distill them. I will say that I felt like I had, even if we weren't the most wealthy family, I felt like I did have somewhat of a charmed existence. It's funny, we have this the special that Henry Louis Gates just did about the Black church and the music of the Black church, and it's was so integral to so many people I know who are Black artists, classical artists particularly. And I actually did not grow up in the Black church because my mother, who actually is in her third career as a Lutheran pastor right now in Long Island, joined the Lutheran church when she was actually in college because she wanted to raise her children in that tradition. And we actually were raised in one of the oldest German Lutheran parishes in the country. St. Michael's Lutheran Church. And so there was actually a German on the seal that I got in my confirmation, Das Manna noch heute fällt, man, it still falls today. And so we sang Bach cantatas every third Sunday in German regularly. So and it was an ethnically mixed parish. So 1 minute we would be singing, something from the, Geistliches Gesangbuch, and then the next minute we would be singing, "We've come this far by faith," and I grew up in that, and so that fed me so much. I will say that I wouldn't be the musician that I am or became if I didn't have teachers that saw me for who I was and were willing to buck some of the trends and go above and beyond for me. I was a precocious young student. I was always 2 or 3 years younger than everybody in my grade. I went to public school. And my Latin teacher and my English teachers and the choir and band teachers all the way through always saw what I needed that was different than all of the other students. And when you're managing a choral program in a large suburb, that has about 400 students in it, to make so much space for one student that they knew needed just that extra bit. Even now I see it way differently because I'm on the other end of it, but that was a heavy lift, and I am eternally grateful to them for doing that. It's so clear to me how much those teachers gave, not just to me, but so many of us students that were interested in choral music. And singing and conducting bit me a little bit early. So I started studying unwittingly because there was a Italian soprano who was in the church choir at the church I grew up in, and she spoke English extremely well, but with an extremely heavy accent. Her husband was an American citizen, and they had just moved. And I would sit right by the choir loft, and I would sing and pipe up with the hymns, and I would hear my voice ring when the organ would cut off. And she said, "Your son is coming over to my house for 30 minutes every day after school." And so on my way home, I would just go and stop by her house after school, and I would just learn from her. And I didn't really know, I didn't realize until I was maybe at the end of my undergraduate studies that I was being trained in a very old school way. I didn't know that you were supposed to sing songs as you were learning to sing. I sang a bunch of vocalises. I didn't know that they were, Garcia Per and Lamperti and Marchesi until I had a class that told me what those were. And I'm like, wait a minute, I've sung this. I used to sing this when I was 10 or 11. So there were all of these full circle moments that happened throughout my training. And I went to Temple University, as Jermaine mentioned, and two people that really saw something really special in me from the very beginning. One is not here, God rest his soul, was the opera conductor there, John Douglas, and the other one was an amazing conductor, Alan Harler. And they both saw something special in me because, first of all, I started college when I was 16, and I was in concert choir, and we were preparing to do the St. John Passion. And John Humphrey, an amazing evangelist, if you're familiar with him, I think he was teaching at UMass Amherst. He was our evangelist, and Alan Harler heard me come in. I wanted to sing only one of arias. I just wanted one aria, just one. Eilt ihr angefochtenen Seelen. And he was like, you're going to sing Jesus. And I was like, what? What? So I prepared all these Bach recits and these ariosi, and finally meeting this, world-renowned evangelist, and I'm literally not even 18 yet. And he walks up to me after this masterclass that he led with all these graduate students singing the arias from the St. John Passion. And he puts his hand on my shoulder. He says, "You know you're supposed to be 33 to sing this role, right?" And I just started to die laughing. I was like, "I'm sorry, I'm trying. I'm going to try my best." And it ended up being absolutely a wonderful experience. I learned so much just by watching him work through the vagaries of that repertoire. And I got bitten by singing oratorio and recital rep during that time. And I actually spent most of my career, when I really was working professionally earlier on, singing oratorio, concert, and recital repertoire. After I graduated from Temple, after I finished from Temple, I had already started singing oratorios professionally. I had sung my first full Messiahs with orchestra, and I had sung an Elijah. People knew I was young, but I had a big fro, so I don't think they asked me any questions. And I literally sang. I sang for a small program at the German Society, and there happened to be somebody from the Mozarteum there. So it was a program for the German Society. And they said, "Have you ever thought of studying abroad?" I'm like, "Well, I don't have any money to go over there. I don't have money to study abroad." But I took the audition and I got into the opera program at the Mozarteum. And so I ended up there, and I was not 19 yet. And my first semester there, this is just how interesting things go. My first semester there, I was singing my first count in Nozze. It was assigned to me, and the person who was conducting it was Leopold Hager. Leopold Hager was conducting the opera, and he came into the practice room and saw me playing. I was a theory geek, and I could read open score at the piano, and he saw me playing, and he just left the room. And then the next day, I get called to his office, and he and Maestro Davies, Russell Davies, were there. Klaus Hager was there, and they asked me to play something. So they put Idomeneo on the piano, and they're like, "Play this." And I said, and I started to play the overture, and I stopped, and I thought I was being humble. And I said, "Do you want me to do Notine Egal? Like, do you want me to do French style? What do you want me to do? I don't want to do this wrong. I don't want to I'm thinking that this is and here's the other thing. This kind of goes back to something that Howard kind of alluded to, is that, when you're traveling in this rarefied air, you get a little bit of imposter syndrome. And so I always felt like I was this far away from being tested and being like, "Oh, you really don't belong here." So you know what I mean? There's always that little thing. So I just stopped, and I'm like, "Wait a minute, I don't want to do this wrong. How do you want me to do it? Do you want me to do it this way? Do you want me to do it this way? Or do you want me to do it this way?" And they said, "We've heard enough." And they basically mandated that I was going to be a double major in orchestral conducting, and that was that. That was that. And so I finished there. I finished both graduate programs there in a couple of years, and sang. Got a small a contract, a Fest contract, a full-time singing contract in Bremen, and which is great experience, because you sing a lot of roles in a very small amount of time, and you really learn, if you have the personal metal to deal with singing full time. And there's nothing glamorous about it at all. And one of the things that I encountered very early on when I was singing full time is that I felt my voice was starting to do things. The coaches, who were my best friends and my most trusted ears, felt that my voice was doing something. But moving into certain reps, but the intendants and the casting directors didn't see the same way, because they thought my look was more appropriate for certain roles. And so there were a number of times where and I'm still thankful that a couple of those coaches really stood up for me, because I was still incredibly young at that point, and said, "He shouldn't be singing. His voice is not the servant role. This is a noble voice. This is a voice that should be singing the count." And they actually listened. Now, I could have gotten in trouble, but they actually listened. And that saw me through for a number of years. And I sang in a number of different places, did a lot of recital work, and recital work is what really drew me back home. I wanted to start creating my own narratives through song. And I landed back in Philadelphia, my hometown, and saw that there was an amazing wealth of talent amongst the community there. I was at a predominantly African-American Anglican parish, and these people were singing dark and howls like you wouldn't believe, but with that full-throated sound that you don't expect. And I was like, wait a minute, how did I land here? And why aren't y'all singing places? Why aren't you singing? Why? There are people I've sung on stage next to that don't sing like you. What? And so that became the thing that changed my focus. And I felt like I wanted to use what I had gained in my own small amount of life experience to kind of help feed the talent and the love of music of all these people in these communities that I came in contact with. And so from that, I started a small program where they could learn about diction and repertoire alongside young artists. And that ended up leading me to Vermont to lead the music director, be music director of the Putney School, which has a crazy singing tradition, a boarding school in the middle of cow country, Vermont, that sings Bach and Haydn, and everyone sings it. You know, everyone sings it. The staff, the students, the faculty, and then we go and sing, Rattling Bog or some sea shanty. But it's still part of the tradition, and from that, just that belief in the power of communal singing has really been what's sort of taken me through the last 7 or 8 years of my work and led me to why I'm sort of here amongst you and still in New England and still very happy, working with communities and making communities sing, helping them sing.
Bravo, Kaelin, my dear friend. Next up, a queen, Dr. Jolie Rocke, renowned soprano and teacher, has performed as a featured soloist in the United States, Europe, and far north Queensland, Australia. The native New Yorker is a versatile vocalist of varied repertoire, including opera, jazz, gospel, and musical theater. Dr. Rocke has taught at Texas Southern University, Prairie View A&M University, Manchester Community College, University of Connecticut, and in several public schools of Hartford, Connecticut. In addition to actively performing, presenting master classes and lectures nationally, she serves as adjunct professor at San Jacinto College, artist in resident at St. Peter United Church of Christ, and as a vocal coach for V. Michael McKay's Houston Gospel Legends Choir. Dr. Rocke co-founded Equity Arts Enterprises, LLC, an arts education and entertainment business, both based in Houston, Texas. She was conferred a Doctor of Musical Arts in Vocal Performance from the University of Connecticut, a Master of Early Childhood Education from Loyola College in Baltimore, and a Bachelor of Music from the University of Hartford's Hart School. Yes. The video you are about to see is of her singing Margaret Bond's powerful setting of the Langston Hughes text, I Too Sing America.
I too sing America.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jolie Rocke.
Thank you, Jermaine, and thank you, Jack and Rick and everyone from the Hartford Chorale for having me, for thinking of me. I have a 30-year career in Connecticut, which I do miss Connecticut, the people, and my life there. I do not miss the cold, and I had a taste of that last week down here in Houston. So, and that was like, no, you don't miss it. But I do miss so many dear friends and a very loving community that was always so supportive of my artistry. And so let's start with New York. I grew up in New York City, in Hollis, Queens, right down the block from Run DMC and Jam Master Jay. Those are rap artists for those of you who don't know the rap industry. I do not like rap music. I've never liked it, but I grew up down the block from them, and I had one brother who loves rap and wanted to be a rap artist. Didn't work out well for him. At any rate, I was the unusual Black child in an all-Black neighborhood in Hollis, Queens, that at 10 years old started taking voice lessons with a African-American singer who was the director of our church musician. And she was an opera singer. And she started teaching me in my first lesson spirituals and the 24 classical Italian arias. So the first song was Caro Mio Ben, and that was lined up with Steal Away. And then, the repertoire kept growing. When she introduced these songs to me, I was in awe and I loved them. And I did not tell any of my friends that I was learning how to sing in another language because I didn't want anybody to make fun of me. So I said, this is my little thing, and I'm going to do my thing, and I'm going to enjoy it, and I'm not going to worry about everybody else. Eventually, they found out, but, it was okay. I had to protect myself. So I started singing actually when I was 3 years old. My mom always sang to me as an infant and as a child. It's a dear memory that I have of my mother. She's still with us, but it's, one of those things I will never forget is hearing my mother's voice singing to me. And at 3, she found me in the corner of the living room singing Into the Corner. And she looked, this is her story. She looked and she's like, what is wrong with my child? And she didn't say anything. She let me stay in the corner and she tried to figure it out. Thank God. I thank God today that my mother stood there and tried to figure it out and didn't shoo me out of the corner. And she realized that it was because I enjoyed listening to my own voice, which is something that singers need to do. They need to love their voice or it just kind of doesn't work out. And so I started out with that. So that was a good thing. So she went across the street and got one of the guys who had a band that was traveling all over the world. And she told Arthur, come over and teach Jolie a song. And he taught me, if I had a hammer, if I had a hammer, I'd hammer in the morning. So some of you all might remember that song. It was really popular when I was 3 years old. And so that was the first song. And I sang it for everybody at all of the family gatherings, for our neighbors, because I would go to people's house for tea. All the little ladies, the old ladies that stayed home, housewives, I would go to their house for tea and I would sing. And so that's how I started out performing. My grandfather was a staff sergeant in the Army, and he was, as a part of his job, he would produce shows for the Army at Fort Totten, and he would take them all over New York and New England. And we actually found an article in 1952 about my grandfather in the Daily News, but they never put a picture, and they never mentioned that he was Black, because if they did, there would have been no article. And so my grandfather, I spent every weekend with my grandparents, and I went over to my grandparents, and my grandfather taught me how to carry a book on my head. He taught me how to eat with utensils nicely so that people wouldn't run away from the table when I ate. Also, all of my etiquette skills my grandfather taught me. My grandfather taught me how to tap dance. I didn't do real well with it, but he tried. He he had me listening to now this is really gonna get you reel to reel audios of Fats Waller and the Andrews sisters and Dinah Washington. That is where I got my love for jazz. But my grandfather also, on those weekends when the Met, I grew up in New York, when the Met Galas would be on, my grandfather had me in front of that television watching Grace Bumbry and Joan Sutherland, and the list can go on. Marilyn Horne, and he made sure that when Leontine and Martina and Grace and Shirley and Simon Estes and all of the African American opera singers of the 70s were coming onto television, he made sure that I was standing there watching them and listening to them. And he would make specific mention of some of the things that they were doing. So a lot of my performance craft, I also took dance lessons as a child and started out as a dancer, but I wanted to sing. And so as a child, I credit a lot of my talent and drive and motivation for the arts to my grandfather. And so I and I'll tell you this, in fourth grade, I auditioned for the choir. And the teacher, Miss Moses, said to my mother, she didn't get in because she's tone deaf. It was very interesting. And so my mother says, well, she sounds pretty good at home, but okay, she won't be in the choir. So I went on. And in fifth grade, I started going to church at 10 years old. And I was singing. It didn't stop me from singing. So I was singing in the pews, and the choir director, musician, Sister Russell, who's still alive, and we still stay in contact today. She was my first voice teacher. She came to my mother after the very first service that we were in church, and she said to my mother, your daughter needs to be in the choir, and she needs to be taking voice lessons with me. And my mother was like, okay, this is really bizarre. We don't have any money for her to take lessons, but she can certainly come to the choir. And so I joined the choir, and eventually my grandparents started paying for me to have voice lessons. By the time I got into junior high school, in sixth grade, my choir teacher, who all of my brothers went to the same high school, the same junior high school. And so the choir director knew me all my life. And so she said, let me hear Jolie sing. So I went and sang, and she said, oh, she has a voice. So my mother said, well, the fourth grade teacher told her that she, was tone deaf. And they said, she's not tone deaf. We got this. Don't worry about it. And so between my choir director in school through middle school or junior high school, and my voice teacher, I was like the lead soloist for the school, starting out in sixth grade, for seventh grade, eighth grade. And I was in the color guard and sang the national anthem every week. And sometimes some of the other kids had to have a chance. So everyone, and in all of the concerts, I always had a solo in the concerts, and I was known around Hollis as the little girl with the big voice, because I was really, really tiny. I was really tiny. I'm 5 feet tall, so you can imagine what I looked like when I was, 10, 11, right? So that started my career. I went on to the High School of Music and Arts in New York City, and again became one of the soloists, sang in solo voice, and for most of the concerts in all 4 years, I was one of the lead singers and received the vocal award for the department when I graduated. And while I was at Music and Art, I got to go to the Met. all the time. I was one of those few hand selected students, that maybe not more than 10 of us, and we would be able to go to the Metropolitan Opera and see closed private rehearsals. And so I got to see Leona Mitchell on stage. I got to see Kathleen Battle at A.B. Fisher Hall in her rehearsal. It was 4 students that were selected, and we got to see Kathleen Battle in her Mozart Requiem debut in rehearsal at Avery Fisher Hall. As a child, I sang with the New York Philharmonic. I sang, and I always somehow ended up behind French horns and trumpets. And so the French horn, I remember the principal French hornist for the Philharmonic at that time was Black. I think he was the only Black person in the orchestra, and he turned around and he said, "Who is that little girl with that big voice?" And so that is kind of how I was known, and went on to the Hart School, and decided at the Hart School, as I told my mother and all my family and my teachers, that I was going to the Hart School to major in voice. I decided I was majoring in music education because I wanted to give back to children, because so many teachers had given to me along the way. And I majored in music ed with a voice, not really a minor, but with voice. I took my voice lessons and some other voice classes as my electives, and went on to Hartford Public Schools and taught in Hartford Public Schools. I experienced a lot of racism at the Hart School, and I am now a 4-time board of directors, alumni board of directors member at the University of Hartford. And I've served as an alumni liaison on the board of directors for Hart and for the university. And I will continue to do things for the university, because for the past 30 years, the university has changed significantly, and it is continuing to change. And I am happy to have been a part of that change. One of them being, working on trying to increase student population from 7% of students of color when I was in school to 38% today. And so now we're working on faculty and staff and administration. So one of my tasks as the director of Alumni of Color Task Force. So I, as a Hartford resident, I taught in Hartford Public Schools at several elementary, middle, and high schools. I taught at the Greater Hartford Academy of the Arts, and decided to take a sabbatical and go to UConn, because I had started my career 9 years into teaching, singing in the Porgy and Bess at the Connecticut Opera, which is no longer here, under the tutelage of Willie Waters and Kyle Swan, who's on the call. Kyle was one of my coaches, and Maria Levy, and so many wonderful people really fed me, fed my voice. I worked with David Brewer. I had 2 kids at the time, and decided for some reason I needed a third. And while I was pregnant, I would drive into New York and take lessons with David Lee Brewer, who eventually left New York and moved to Berlin. He's in Berlin now. And Willie would coach me, and so I grew my career. I sang with Concora. I've sung at Asylum Hill Congregational Church. I was there for 13 years as one of the section leaders and soloists. I sang at other Faith Congregational Church, and so many churches in the Connecticut area. Not even looking at I just sang at Catholic churches, Baptists, all kind of religions. Even did presentations at the mosque. So the Hartford community was really good to me, and enjoyed what I had to offer as an artist. I toured through Europe with Porgy and Bess, and then I decided after a cancer journey that I wanted to just sing whatever I wanted to sing and do what I wanted to do. And that's what I do today. Today I'm self-employed. I am an adjunct professor at at San Jacinto College down here in Houston. But mostly I'm helping young artists. I mentor young artists all over the country, from R&B, gospel, jazz, classical, opera, spirituals, you name it. I even have had students that sing heavy metal, and they want to come to me because their voice is damaged. I fix the voice and they still sing what they love, and I'm fine with that. I am all about teaching people how to sing healthy so that they have lasting careers. And that is my story, and I am happy to share it with you and happy to be here. Thank you.
Yes, 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 yes. And I love how engaged everyone is. And lastly, the honor and privilege of introducing Dr. David Hurd, who is widely recognized as one of the foremost church musicians and concert organists in the United States, with a long list of awards, prizes, and honors recognizing his achievements and expertise in organ performance, improvisation, and composition. From 1976 until 2015, David Hurd taught on the faculty of the General Theological Seminary of the Episcopal Church in New York City. He is the composer of dozens of published choral, vocal, liturgical, and organ works. In 2010, he became the 15th recipient of the American Guild of Organists Distinguished Composer Award. And from 1998 until 2013, he was music director and organist at Church of the Holy Apostles Episcopal in New York City. He is currently the organist and music director of the famed Church of St. Mary the Virgin at Times Square. He studied in New York at the Juilliard School, the High School of Music and Art, and the Manhattan School of Music. His undergraduate music degree is from Oberlin College in Ohio, and he continued his studies at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. The video you are about to see features the Dessoff Choir of New York performing an excerpt of the fourth movement of Dr. Hurd's work in honor of Martin. The text is, "And when some spit out hate, he stood there smiling, spreading love until it rolled like the sea across the land, sweeping away Jim Crow, breaking down the walls, ringing the bell joyfully for freedom, until standing on the mountaintop, they shot him coldly, hoping to see him fall, to bring him low." That is chillingly stunning. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. David Hurd.
Thank you so much, Jermaine, and thank you to all of you from the Hartford Chorale for this invitation to be with you. I've so enjoyed hearing the performances and the stories of my colleagues on the panel this evening. And I'm so glad that I have things that I share with you, like growing up in Hollis. I too grew up in Hollis and went to Music and Art High School. So we have that in common. I'm really glad to know that. I spent the Saturdays of my teen years at the Juilliard School. So I have the Juilliard in common. And I remember playing a Bach recital at St. Michael's Church in Germantown several years ago. And so there are just many, many connections. My connection with choral music goes back to the very beginning of my memory, because the first live music I ever heard was in church. I was born into an Anglican family, and my first recollections of activities outside of the house were going to church and going to my grandparents' house. And in church, there was always singing and there was organ playing. And I just loved it from the very beginning. And at my grandparents' house, there were two pianos, and there were lots of people who played them. And the pianos were constantly being played, and singing was going on there. And avocational music was part of family life. My parents were very supportive of my inclinations to music that apparently became conspicuous very early on. And so as soon as it was possible to have a piano in the house, at 6 years old, I started to take lessons. And the combination of hearing choral music and organ music, and then finding my way to the keyboard just was the way it all started. By the time I was 9 years old, I was able to sing in the choir of the parish church. By this time, we had moved to Hollis. I was born in Brooklyn and spent the first several years of my life living in Brooklyn. But by the time I was 9 years old, living in Hollis, I started to sing in the choir of boys and men at St. Gabriel's Church, right on the other side of the Long Island Railroad tracks. and Lily Andujar Rogers was the director of music there, and she was a fantastic model. My family was one of the first, if not the first, African-American family to attend St. Gabriel's. It was literally on the other side of the tracks when we moved to Hollis. And so we were welcomed in a sort of distant way. I decided to become very involved in the parish and sing in the choir and be an acolyte and do all sorts of things. And I was fearless. My parents taught me to basically believe in myself and be fearless. And but in retrospect, I realized that there were lots of strange things that went on. Now, Lily Rogers was an absolute supporter of my development as a child singer and as a keyboardist. And she answered all my questions and let me pester her at the end of every service about this and that. And she was also my first model as a choral conductor. And so I became fascinated by the whole idea of people singing together and being directed. And I learned a lot of basic lessons from her about how a choir is organized and whatever. And so moving on to junior high school, I went to junior high school with a wonderful music department, and became, I was in the band track, so I played band instruments and enjoyed that tremendously. But I was identified kind of accidentally as a kid who played the piano. And so immediately I was sort of drawn into accompanying. And in that connection, met S. Carroll Buchanan, who was a wonderful choral director, and he was the chair of the music department at the school, and he was also one of the directors of borough-wide choruses and city-wide choruses and whatever. And so he gave me my first opportunity to conduct when I was in ninth grade. He put me in charge of conducting an offstage choir in an assembly production, and this was the first time I had actually conducted a choir. But at any rate, Carroll Buchanan figures largely in my formation in choral music. When going on to High School of Music and Art, Sybil Mandel was the director of was chair of the vocal department, and I was a band and orchestra track student at Music and Art, but I found that it was possible to also do vocal arts, and so working with Mrs. Mandel, who was a fierce taskmaster. One developed the ability to read a score, and one had to, because there was great humiliation in failing to do it adequately once you were charged with the responsibility. But again, she was a tremendous model just to watch her work and to be forced to do things that otherwise I might not have tried to do. And so interestingly, the whole time, obviously, I wanted to play the organ, and I had begun organ lessons at the age of 12 when my feet were long enough to reach the pedals, and that remained my primary focus. But you know, when you're a keyboardist, you spend a lot of time by yourself in the practice room, and it's wonderful to do that. But I loved ensemble music also, and so the time in the practice room was balanced by my enjoyment of playing in orchestra and in band and singing. And always. And so when I went off to Oberlin, I went as an organ major. But I wanted to do everything. I wanted to take singing. I wanted to continue playing the trombone. Well, one couldn't do everything. But I did sing in the college choir. Under Robert Fountain. And again, I never studied choral conducting with Robert Fountain, but it was just an education to sing in his choir and to watch him work. And I felt very encouraged chorally about that. While I was in high school, I actually got into the composition class. Because composition had always been interesting to me, and I liked writing music. I'd written a few piano pieces as a child, and they had gotten a good response, and so I felt encouraged. When I went away to Oberlin, I didn't do any writing there, but after graduating from Oberlin, I found myself back in New York as assistant organist at Trinity Church, Wall Street. And in that capacity, at that particular time, Larry King, who was the director of music, was very active in generating new choral music and new congregational music also for the new liturgical texts that were coming out as the prayer book was being revised. And so his activity in writing music sort of was an inspiration to me, and some other colleagues were also kind of very positive in their responses to a few pieces that I had written, and I found myself wanting to write more music. I spent a little time at Duke University when I was working on a graduate degree at Chapel Hill, and I was assistant director of choral work, the chapel choir at Duke, and assistant organist. And so again, that was a lot of time with choral music. As assistant, basically, I was a rehearsal accompanist most of the time. But again, dealing with choral music and ever vigilant to the director and learning choral direction sort of on my feet, as it were. Then back to New York again, and again in a situation where I had a wonderful choir, and there was just a great need for music. Sometimes the makeup of the choir just changed unexpectedly, and the piece that I had decided we would do, suddenly I didn't have the voices to sing. So that was a call to write, and so I wrote music for the musicians I had at my disposal, and it showed itself as a kind of fun thing to do. I enjoyed doing it, and the interesting thing was I thought of myself as an organist, but increasingly the singers I worked with thought of me as a composer. And since most of the work that I was doing was choral, that all sort of came together. Then I went off to teach at General Seminary, and I was director of chapel music there, and again responsible for community singing, and responsible for a small ensemble that did choral music, and it was great to have a group to write for. For the last 20 some odd years, I have been in parish situations where I've had professional choirs, and that's been a very tantalizing opportunity to write more expansively, and I've been happy to accept several lovely commissions, like the commission for the piece in honor of Martin, of which you heard a fragment earlier, which was first commissioned by Carl Maltzby for his Rejoice ensemble, and it was first composed to be a piece for 5 solo voices, piano, string bass, and percussion. And after its premiere in around 2006 or so, some choral directors decided, well, why don't we do this with our choir? And so finally, Malcolm Merriweather, directing the Dessoff choirs, asked me to do a complete orchestration of the piece, to build it up so that the accompaniment would be in balance with a large choir. Large chorus, and so that's what happened to that piece, which the final version was premiered at Alice Tully Hall in 2016, interestingly enough, when I was an undergraduate at Oberlin in the late 60s, and as a matter of fact, it was in my freshman year that in April of my freshman year, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. And a lot changed that year. I had entered college thinking that there was no reason why I couldn't do anything I wanted to do. However, the options seem to get a little redefined in terms of what activities were acceptably African American and which activities might be suspect. And I think that going forward, I have found myself in many situations where I have been the only African American in those situations, and or one of very, very few. And it's having been African American my entire life, I have very little way of knowing what things would have been different if I were not African American. So therefore, I have that experience, and I look back at several things and hearing what some of my co-panelists have said, and I realized that there were a lot of incidents that were strange, and some uncomfortable. But generally speaking, I'm grateful for many wonderful opportunities I've had and many wonderful people that I've met along the way. And for many of the people, some African American, like Harold Buchanan, like the organists of St. Philip's Church in Brooklyn, where I first heard the organ played, who were lettered African American organists. I'm very grateful for those people, and I'm grateful for others who have stepped forward and who have come to my aid. For my organ teacher at the Juilliard School, who realized that my parish church was giving me a hard time for practice time, and he illegally provided me a practice room key so that to be sure that I would have practice facilities. And I'm grateful for people who have stepped forward at times to really help me along. And so I'll end there. And thank you for your invitation to speak with you tonight.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hurd, and all of our amazing speakers tonight. I have been getting just a couple questions that people have sent to me, and we're just I know we're a little overtime, but I totally think this is worth it, and that's totally okay, and I'm just going to make that call right now. So the just have to open up my screen here where I have these questions. First question is for Dr. Watkins, and that is, based on your life experiences, what would you tell your younger self now about what it means to be treated normal or typecast?
Wow, that's a tough question. I was actually just thinking back to something Dr. Hurd just said, and I think this would relate to that. That he said he of course has been. We have all been African American our whole lives, so we don't really know what it's like to be different. And I've always prided myself that. Let me say it a different way. I'm always a little taken aback when someone even mentions to me that I'm African American, because I don't even generally think about it. It's just, I just am, and that's just who I am. So it doesn't occur to me to think about it. And sometimes, now we're doing something different here, so this is a different situation, but most of the times if someone mentions it to me, it usually makes me pop for a second and think, oh, that's right. Oh, yes, you would think about that, but it doesn't occur to me. I'm just a person trying to do what I do and be the best that I can be. So I would just tell my younger self to do the same thing I did. There's no reason to think about that. The thing to think about is to be the best that I can be at what I want to do, and allow people to see who I am and let that speak for itself. Somebody was making the comment here that that this was more about life stories, and I actually love that. I love that it's about life stories, because it's a good opportunity for everyone to see that we just have our life stories, and Black people, the same as white people, have life stories and different life stories and come from different places, and that's awesome.
Thank you. Kaelin, over your years of experience, did you learn about your voice as well as your European voice coaches did? And did you use that knowledge to learn how to advocate for parts that you thought you would be good at?
Wow, so that's a deep sense of self question. Actually, I wouldn't even talk about it wasn't just the European voice coaches, it was some on this side of the water too. And there always, I will say this, there's always in the development of any solo artist, there starts to be there's kind of this what I love and I call an inflection point where you've gotten the technique, you've learned a number of roles, you've sung, you start to identify what feels good, right? The voice is always changing, you're to keep developing, but you start to identify what feels good. There's certain music that goes. I mean, sometimes the German opera houses talk about the Fach system. I don't completely prescribe to that because Fach always overlaps. There's always overlaps in the repertoire in the Fach system. But once you get that, once you have a sense of that, I know I started to have a sense of that probably actually in my mid to late 20s, where I felt that my voice was starting to really shift. I went from being essentially a lyric baritone with some bite to singing more what they could call the cavalier baritone repertoire. And that felt really, really good. Even before I was supposedly ready to sing it, it started to feel good. And I think, and this actually, it's interesting. It's a dovetail off of the question that got asked to Howard about typecasting, is that when you're a singer, there's tons of typecasting. And sometimes you have to take a risk to say no. One of the things I almost lost my agent, and I had a really good agent in Europe in the mid 2000s, and I got offered a couple of Porgy and Bess contracts, and I had just sang my first Di Luna in Trovatore, and I'm like, okay, I haven't hit my stride singing these standard roles yet. And he was like, this is going to make you a lot of money. And I'm like, but I don't want to sing it right now. Like, that's not what I want to sing. I want to sing these roles that my voice is growing into and feel really good. And I don't want to be, and there's that danger. There was a great article about it in the New York Times, actually. Like, I don't want to be pigeonholed as a singer you call on to sing that. Just that. So I told him, even though he wanted to get it because he would have made a ton of money, I told him, I'm not taking those contracts. Tell them to come back to me when they have a count. And I worked a little less those 2 years, but I think I was much happier and my vocal development was, I think, better because I made that choice, sort of knowing what my temperament was inside. And that's how I can answer that question.
Question for Jolie. What is your advice to people who aspire to sing outside of their comfort zone but have a mental barrier and cannot bring themselves to take the first step?
Take a step. Really, take a step. Listen to the genre. We have YouTube today. We have the internet. Go online, listen to what other people are doing, get some experience with it, play with it, right? You might not be the best artist for gospel or for jazz or for opera or for art song or for Stravinsky or for Britten, but taste and see. Taste and see. And you might like it, and it might turn out to be better than what you've been doing. So I say try. Again, my philosophy is you got to sing with good vocal technique, and understand that, and just take that technique and use it in all the different genres that you sing. But try it.
Question for Dr. Hurd. What do you aspire to write about to help expand the universe of choral music?
To write about.
Or compositionally, what do you aspire to write?
Well, as I've always been, I think, a bit of a practical composer. I've written music that I had a performance need for. I've written music that others have had a performance need for, and that music that others have commissioned me to write because they thought that this was something that I would do well, and that has sort of at times pushed me out of my comfort zone, and made me learn things that I would not have necessarily taken on to do had I not been pushed in that direction. I have some sort of pet projects. The Met has not yet come forward and commissioned me to write an opera, so that probably is not going to happen immediately. But I've had a thought of actually writing a major choral passion, and that's one of the things I've thought of doing. But I'm certainly open to suggestions, and I'm open to suggestions.
Wonderful. Question for all three of you, or all four of you, and we'll start maybe in order with Howard first. If you could collaborate with an artist who is no longer with us, who would it be?
Oh my goodness, that's a tough one. I'm not really sure.
If you want to give that some more thought.
You know, it's funny. When I was at Michigan, Shirley Verret came to work to teach there towards the end of my time there, and that's, you know, I was a grad student then. I had not had the experiences I've had over the last 25 years, and of course she's no longer with us. But I would love to go back knowing what I know now and having had the experience and really work with her and be able to play. That would be great fun.
Kaelin.
Oh my goodness, that's like I'm like I have to pick one. It's so God, there's so many. When I actually think, you know, because I would love, especially because I've done so much of his music as a conductor. I really would love to have like been able to sit down with with either Margaret Bonds or Grant Still and have them write a song cycle for me. I would love, you know, I start one of the things I love the most about being kind of at the end of the 90s and stuff like that and working with a bunch of graduate composition students is that experience of having something fit for you. And I've only had that, and I love their music so much, and they talk about like profoundly Black stories, and to have their knowledge and their language, their sound language wrapped around my instrument, I would be so gone. So gone.
Thank you. Jolie.
Marion Anderson. I wrote my dissertation about her, but I would love to have sung with her, a duet. I would have loved to travel with her and gain some of her quiet understandings that she kind of kept to herself. And I've dug through the 200 boxes in the library in Pennsylvania. I've read handwritten notes. I know a lot about Marion Anderson. How she worked, you know, and spoke on behalf of the government and traveled all over the world and met with people and with just such grace, and how she changed how people saw the Black woman, you know, as intelligent, beautiful, dignified, God-fearing. You know, I would just love to sit down with her. 5 minutes even. That wouldn't be enough. But
All right. David Hurd.
I mentioned before S. Carroll Buchanan, who was the head of the music department at my junior high school. And in many ways, he was an extraordinary person. He was himself Juilliard trained, and came into teaching choral music and vocal music, developed really quite wonderful choirs. But he was the one who really sort of turned me on to spirituals and to the choral arrangements of spirituals. And he developed, he conducted a choir, adult choir, that after I was out of junior high, he had me accompany for several years. And I toured with them some and recorded with them some. And they did programs entirely of choral arrangements of spirituals. And that was a whole genre of choral music that I didn't know really, and that was very important for me to get to know. He went on after his teaching career he spent some time in the Peace Corps, and he came back from that, and then he went to NYU and did a doctorate, and his doctoral dissertation was on part singing on Black plantations, and male chorus singing, and unfortunately, before we had really a chance to fully explore his research, before I had a chance to explore his research with him, he died, unfortunately. And I would love to pick up that conversation. I'd love to pick up that conversation.
Well, my friends, we have all been blessed tonight, every one of us here, by the stories and the lives and experiences of all four of these amazing artists. From the bottom of our hearts, we thank you for sharing a bit of yourself with us, and hope that as you continue on your journeys, that it is a blessed one, and that you continue to find those moments when you can have the positive impact on others that you have had on us tonight. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Reminder that in 2 weeks we have our next event, meeting composer Scott Perkins. I hope that all of you here will plan to join us for that tonight. But until then, we wish you all a beautiful rest of your Monday night and the rest of your February. Bye-bye.